if something serious happened the next time you're on the water, would you be ready? If you or someone else got seriously hurt or a real medical emergency unfolded, would you actually know what to do? I just renewed my wilderness first aid, and every 2 years when I do, the same very uncomfortable question comes up. One I think most paddlers carry but never ask out loud. Am I ready? Not just prepared with a first aid kit, but ready to use it. Because those are two different things, and most of us have never seriously examined the gap between them. Today, I want to start by looking at the 3 most common injuries that I prepare for on the water, and then that mindset shift that actually helped me close that readiness gap. I want to bring you into the entire process, and this is not a great place to pull apart a first aid kit, so let's go inside. This recertification, as I just mentioned, has me thinking about readiness. You know, in these 2-day workshops, we do a lot of practice. We get a lot of new info. We deal with some real life-threatening scenarios and get like, oh, try this instead or do that this way. And then life goes back to normal. And for me, I stopped thinking about all of the stuff I did in that 2-day workshop, honestly. And I find it interesting that, you know, with my paddling group anyway, we practice skills. We drill skills, paddling skills, rescue skills, navigation skills. We might even very often practice towing somebody. And you would tow somebody if they're injured or unable to paddle themselves. But what we don't do is back that drill up into, okay, let's pretend Bob at lunch slipped and broke his wrist. Let's splint Bob's wrist. Let's swath and cradle his arm. Let's get him back in the boat. Let's tow him, and let's actually build it up from the scenario of actually taking care of the actual medical thing that may have come up that requires some of these skills. My not so quiet admission, because I'm sharing it with all of you, is this internal fear that I have of, will I actually be ready to deal with something complex or serious on the water? I want to make sure that if something happens, I'm ready, and that every 2-year training, it's just not a lot. It's not a lot of time to build up these skills and to have that confidence. I'm going to share with you here in a little bit the mindset shift I've recently made that's actually, I think, made me feel ready and made me feel confident in those scenarios. But first, I want to zoom out. Because while there are some really complex things that can arise out there that are going to stretch our first aid skills, and specifically our wilderness first aid skills, and that just means anytime you're more than an hour away from definitive care. So essentially anytime I'm on the water, to be honest. But I do believe there are some really common things that we can prepare for as paddlers and think about. So what I wanted to start with are the 3 most common injuries I think we as paddlers can face. Okay, the first one is cuts. And friends, in this entire episode, I'm not going to tell you how to use the stuff in your kit. There are different places for that. I will at the end share a link where you can get a copy of what I do actually pack in my first aid kit. And my first aid kit is kind of a catch-all. It's a boat repair kit, a human repair kit, an emergency, dealing with emergency situations kit. So I'll leave a link later in the episode if you wanted to check that out. But cuts, the most common injury I think we find and can face on the water. It's not uncommon to hear that the surf zone is the most dangerous place we as paddlers find ourselves. Getting in and out of the boat, even when there's not a lot of wave action, is really tricky. You know, barnacles, rocks, awkward moments, seaweed. But add a little bit of wave action to that, and that area gets a lot more gnarly. That's probably the most common place I see capsizes of people getting in and out of their boats, honestly. So yeah, someone with cuts, someone sticking their hand out to brace themselves and getting scraped up by barnacles or mussels, or along the shore. You're paddling along the shore, even you're not even in the surf zone, and you know you want to brace against a rock and you cut yourself. And I couldn't believe the oyster shells in British Columbia when I was there, and South Carolina when I was there. Like, those things are just like meat grinders. And then more commonly up here, barnacles. So yeah, cuts, scraping ourselves, getting a little bit chewed up. Okay, so some prevention here. Don't touch rocks with your bare hand. Use your paddle, use a gloved hand, and not just sun gloves, friends. Like get some like work gloves or some neoprene gloves, something that's gonna stand up to those scrapey bits. Also, just have your heads up when you're on shore. Just really slow down and think, what's gonna happen? Am I ready? Is the surf coming in? Is that gonna be a stable landing? Just take an extra moment or two before you launch or land just to get your head on and to be ready for the really dynamic conditions that happen there. So the treatment here is to stop the bleeding. Use clean gauze, you can use some pressure, but get that bleeding to stop. After that bleeding has stopped, you're gonna wanna clean the area really well, particularly if that cut came from a barnacle or a mussel. Friends, those things are nasty, and you want to use a lot of fresh, clean water to flush that out. And not seawater, because seawater is just as nasty. You want to use fresh, clean water and really flush those types of cuts and scrapes out. After that, you're going to want to bandage the site, and for this, I use a compound benzoin tincture that acts a little bit like a skin glue almost, that helps the adhesive from the bandage really stick to it. Even drying it out, your skin might still be a little damp or moist. You're going back into a marine environment and getting wet again, and things are going to have a hard time sticking. I found this out on a recent trip, or a trip last year, where I scraped myself on a barnacle and just had a heck of a time keeping that patched up until I made it to camp and could really let it air out and put a proper dressing on it. So that's the first common injury that I think we as paddlers can be ready for and kind of build our kit ready to manage. Even if we're maybe don't have that wilderness first aid training, be ready to deal with cuts, scrapes, and abrasions. The next really common thing is closely related, and it can come from that shore zone, and that's sprains and strains. Awkward launch, uneven ground, slippery rocks, rockweed, these can all create scenarios where we fall. And where we fall, we could sprain a wrist, sprain an ankle, even just with the surf coming in and our foot in some rocks and rockweed, we could easily hurt ourselves that way. Another thing that to think about is like this could turn into broken bones. We're not going to go into that in this episode, but just making sure that you're understanding that sprains and strains and broken bones are all kind of things you might need to manage. Prevention here, take your time. Take your time when you're in the surf zone, friends. Also do things like group carries with your boat around really tricky tidal zones. And if you're paddling in a part of the country that's got like beautiful sandy beaches, okay, you don't have to worry about that as much. But if you're up here or in areas where the coastline is a lot more jagged, do group carries. All have multiple people on the boat and go slow. Or if you are solo and you need to move your boat, then move your feet, then move your boat, then move your feet. Don't try to just carry your boat in one go if you're not sure. Now in paddling, the other way we might see sprains and strains are from shoulder injuries or wrist injuries. The prevention here is good paddling technique to keep your shoulder protected and to keep your wrist behind the force. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do an episode on those two principles, if you'd like a little bit more information about what those are. But good technique is meant to avoid upper body injuries from paddling. The treatment, if you do find yourself or someone you're with a sprain or a strain, the acronym is RICE, rest, ice, compress, and elevation. And you might not be able to do all of these while you're out on your trip. Okay, so that's kind of the second big thing I'm kind of ready for. I didn't really go into it, but like also starting to deal with splints and building splints for breaks. But that's sort of another thing that kind of falls into this bucket for me. The third bit that I want to share of common things for me is dealing with our temperature. And up here where I paddle, hypothermia, right? Body getting too cold. It's very cold water up here, very cold air most of the time. Immersion risk is going to increase the challenges of hypothermia. If I was paddling with some of you friends down in Florida in August, I would be thinking about hyperthermia. But at the gist, making sure the body temperature stays where it's supposed to, because going either way is not great. But because my main risk is hypothermia, That's what I'm going to share with you. Hypothermia starts just a few degrees below our normal body temperature. Some signs of you or someone is starting to experience hypothermia as your judgment starts to go. You're going to start shivering. And, how many of you have shivered, right? We've all shivered probably at one point in our life, unless you live in a part of the country that doesn't get that cold. But it's very common that many of us have experienced shivering. That's the beginning stages of hypothermia. You're on the way to worse and worse hypothermia if you're already shivering. And then a really common thing to look for is the UMBLES. I've talked about this in another video. Stumbles, grumbles, mumbles, fumbles, right? This decreased coordination, decreased mental processing. These are all signs that you are or someone is experiencing hypothermia. Treatment kind of depends on the severity. Really, like if someone's wet, get them dry. Keep them dry, get someone warm, get some warm liquids and warm food, get them moving if appropriate. Basically, like with food and movement, like get the body's furnace going. And then as we progress through the hypothermia arc, we want to start looking at shelter. Then in really extreme cases, you could find ways to wrap the person up and keep body heat in, or use something like a bothy bag, an emergency shelter or an emergency bag to help keep that heat in and help that person start to restore some of their heat. Now, knowing how to deal with these three really common things is helpful, but it's not the whole story, as I've kind of been alluding to throughout the episode. The other big thing that has been a struggle for me in all of my recertifications, as well as the first time I've taken the wilderness first aid course, is the stress and your brain, the mental side of it. That fear that if something happens, am I going to remember that thing I learned in a conference room 2 years ago? And that was a real concern for me, and something I really noticed every time I've recerted. And this last recertification, I will say the instructors, a friend, a really talented paddler, Todd Johnstone Wright. And what I noticed about Todd is that in the scenarios that he would be offering, he was really calm and he was moving seemingly slowly, but getting a lot done. He uses this phrase like, slow is fast and fast is slow. When I would come up against these situations in the past, I'd be nervous. Okay, what's going on here? And okay, can you tell me your name? And what this last recertification taught me is just slow down. Take your time. Don't waste time, but take your time. Approach it from a slightly more spacious standpoint. And when I was able to do that, I could remember a lot more of the protocols and the processes and I don't want to forget to check their spine and all of the bits and pieces I needed to. So that was one of the first mindset shifts that I came to. The second realization I recently had is I'm not a wilderness paramedic. My job out there is to do the best I can to manage a certain set of challenges. Some of them are going to be well outside of my ability to deal with them on an island 3 hours away from help. But I can do things that help. Seems imperfect, but it's honest. And that honesty just really allows me to, I think, settle back into my skills, know that I can help, I can do some things, I know some things. There's more than I can learn. There's more than I can practice. There's more than I can know. But just really understanding what I'm there to do, stabilize the person, help the person, call for help, minimize things getting worse. And I felt like I could really do that after this last recertification. Now, before I wrap this up, I also want to quickly shout out my new friend, Brett. Brett runs a channel called Adventure Otaku. And it's got some great sea kayaking content and outdoor content over there. And he recently released an episode where he reviewed the Sea Steve Sea Kayak Protractor. And he said some really lovely things about it. Brett, I'm really glad that tool you found so useful. But in that episode, he was also sharing that he doesn't watch a lot of sea kayaking content. And he doesn't do it because he doesn't want to copy those individuals, or he kind of wants to do his own thing. And I feel the exact same way. I actually don't watch a lot of sea kayaking content for similar reasons. And as I was scrolling through his channel, I found he recently did an entire episode on first aid kits. And I gotta say, I was like, oh crap. But I do think his episode goes in a different direction and kind of looks at some different things from his perspective. And this felt like, honestly, it was ready to be made. And I felt like it was different enough and could add value to all of you. So I made this episode. But go check out Brett's channel if you already haven't, Adventure Otaku. Go check out his first aid episode and build your understanding of first aid kits and sea kayaking, as well as go check out some of his other stuff. And Brett, I really hope we get a chance to paddle together this summer when you're up this way. All right, friends. Well, the truth is, unless you are a trained healthcare professional, you're probably not going to be fully ready for everything that could happen out there. But knowing what you're most likely to face and carrying the resources to help you with that, as well as keeping the right mindset when something really gnarly does happen, that's, I think, preparation we can all do. And I think it's more than most paddlers do, if I'm honest. So, how prepared are you? And more importantly, how ready are you? If you want a list of everything that I carry in my first aid kit, and again, I carry more than just first aid medical things. I carry things to deal with a wide range of issues. You can go to csteveckayak.com/first aid, and first aid is all one word there. You can check out what I carry and compare it to what you carry, and then leave something in the comments that you carry that I don't, or leave a comment of a medical emergency you've had to manage while you're out in your adventures and what you learned from that. All right, friends. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I also hope you enjoy your adventures, whatever they are. And until next time, safe paddling. Bye for now.